Hello and good day, everyone. Just going to wait a couple seconds while some folks join us. Hello and welcome. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar discussion. Today our panelists will be discussing the Defund Racism campaign and the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So we'd love to know who's joining us, so feel free to put your name and where you're joining us from today in the chat. My name is Julie Brown, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Christian Peacemaker Teams, and I'm joining from Iowa in the United States. So I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we turn it over to our moderator. We will be dedicating time at the end of the webinar for questions. So there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put any questions that you have there. And that's different than the chat. So there's actually a Q&A button that you should be able to easily find at the bottom of your screen. And any questions that we don't get to live, we will do our best to answer by email later on. And so I would like to just give a brief overview of CPT for any folks who are new with us here today. CPT builds partnerships to transform violence and oppression in situations of conflict. And at the invitation of local peacemaking communities, CPT provides physical accompaniment, advocacy, human rights observation and reporting, and solidarity networking. And our moderator today is Ahmed Abu Munshor. And Ahmed is a Palestinian activist from Hebron. He currently works with CPT, monitoring human rights abuses, Israeli military activities, and settler violence. He is a nonviolence activist and the co-founder of a book club called Books Not Walls in Bethlehem. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ahmed. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the introduction, Julie, and thank you for introducing me. Today, I'm delighted and honored that we have two special guests, two powerful and distinguished. We have Hashem Sharpati and Bana Abu Zulf. Hashem Sharpati is a Palestinian human rights defender based in Hebron. He's a co-founder and coordinator of the Hebron Defense Committee, a nonviolent resistance group that works against the colonial presence and occupation in the city of Hebron, and all forms of the colonialism and racism in Palestine. He studied journalism and worked in the media field for a local international media. He documents the occupation violation in the city of Hebron and also the violation of the Palestinian Authority departments. Hisham is based in Hebron, where he lived most of his life, seeing the growth of the colonial settler enclaves in his city that inspired him to take an active role in the nonviolence resistance. And also we have Bana Abu Zulf. She's a researcher and a community activist with the Good Shepherd Collective, where she has played a crucial role in developing the campaign to defund defund racism, helping organization over 200 Palestinian organizations, villages, and individuals from across historical Palestine to make the call to stop the flow of charitable money to the Israeli settler organizations. We will start with Hisham Sharpati, and then we will continue with Bana. So my question to you, Hisham, can you explain to us what is happening on the ground and how the illegal Israeli settler organization affect the daily life of Palestinians? It's a mute. I cannot hear you. Can you unmute?
I'm muted now. Okay. Hello, everyone. It's nice talking to you. Also, I'm talking about a better situation, and I hope that one day it will change. I talk from Hebron, place that have very special circumstances relating the colonization of Palestine. Now, when we talk about the long history of what's going on in the ground, actually the focal issue in this dispute, in this conflict, is the land. And there is a Zionist fake theory that says Palestine is the land without people that should be given to people with no land. And here I wonder how they got to this theory and how they got to this conclusion, because Palestine was all the time inhabited. There's a long history, there's a heritage, there is a culture that goes back thousands of years ago. Anyway, with the colonization of Palestine, we see that the Zionist movement wanted to obtain as much land as possible. In 1947-48, the United Nations has approved the partition plan for Palestine, where 54% of Palestine was assigned to be a Jewish state, while the Jews only owned nearly 7% or less than 7% of the land that was supposed to be Israel. And that was complete unjust decision by the UN General Assembly. Every year they celebrate this as the 29th of November, International Solidarity Day with the Palestinian people, in which the same date of the partition plan came out. Anyway, we have been through this all the time. The Zionists want to obtain more land all the time, all over historic Palestine. Here I want to put more light on the Palestinian occupied territories, 1967, mainly the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, right after the occupation of 1967, in an illegal huge act, Israel has annexed East Jerusalem to the state of Israel, which is completely not allowed by the international law. And then Israel started building settlements or colonies within the West Bank. The beginning years of the occupation, they talked about areas of strategic value and security value where the settlements were built. That was the theory maybe, or the practice at the early years between 1967 till late 1970s, like 10 years. And then after that, we have a huge growth in building of settlements. Now, it's very important to note that according to the international law, all settlements are illegal. Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention says the occupying power is not supposed to move its citizens to the occupied territory. So we had a growing number of settlements all over the West Bank. What used to be a state land that should be used for the interest and the benefit of the indigenous people, the locals, the Israeli authorities has used it to build settlements. Settlements are growing everywhere. We have settlements in the city of Hebron. And inside Hebron and inside the city of Jerusalem, which became the two main maybe intense places within the West Bank relating the conflict. We see Israeli colonial settlers living in separate settler enclaves in the two cities, practicing different types of attacks against their Palestinian neighbors. Those settlers damage Palestinian properties, physically harass Palestinians, block their way going to school, going to work, and so on. We have minor difference between Hebron and Jerusalem, of which, as I said, Israel has annexed East Jerusalem to the state of Israel, so they enforced the Israeli law in Jerusalem. In theory, the Palestinian in East Jerusalem should be equal to the Israeli colonial settler under, in Jerusalem. But as I said, that's in theory, because the state of Israel defines itself as the state of the Jews. There are lots of laws that give superiority to the Jews based on their religion. And but in Hebron, we have Israeli military law. We have lots of restrictions has been placed over the Palestinians, restricting them going in and out of their homes. Palestinians face home demolition by the Israeli authorities within the West Bank, Area C, which is like more than 60% of the West Bank. Palestinians face, in addition to home demolition, attacks by Israeli settlers, physical attacks against their herds, their properties, their housings, and so on. This practice is going on. When I want to give a small example in the last, I don't know how much time I still have, but this is just a general view. It seems like in Hebron, if I get engaged in a fight with a settler, and first the Israeli, the security forces that are in the ground is the Israeli military. And simply the Israeli military have no jurisdiction over the colonial settlers, as the colonial settlers are Israeli civilians. So as long as the settlers are, beating me, soldiers will keep watching, whether the soldier likes what's going on or not. In the moment I defend myself, I will get arrested and I will be sent to a military trial, while there is very rare cases where the settler can be maybe taken to a police to give his statement. If there is a chance that a settler is taken to court, he will be taken to a civil court. But in most of the cases, he will just give a statement and get released, if not make a complaint against me, and then I will face further consequences. Simply, if I come to your country and I commit any crime or any violation, I will be sent to court based on your law, whether I am a citizen or not. And here we see this is a very clear example of racism. And definition of racism, the legal definition of racism is if you have a discriminatory policy based on color, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, whatever, and this practice is widely used and legalized, then that's racism. And unfortunately, this is what is going on the ground, not only in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, but also within Israel. This policy of racism is funded mainly by different partners of the colonial regime in Israel, mainly the United States of America as a country, and lots of so-called charity organizations. Many of them are having, the tax deduction status, of which where people, if they donate money to these organizations, that will be taken down of their taxes.
You have 1 minute left.
Excuse me, Ahmed?
You still have 1 minute left.
Okay. That's a general view of what's going on the ground. On the details, we go to lots of examples, lots of pictures, or lots of scenes that are so horrible and very bitter in taste, and that makes the situation on the ground miserable in lots of the places of the world. What I want to say, go again to the root of this, the issue here is racism, and racism is the strongest word to use here, and it is the proper word to use. If you talk to Israelis, they try to mislead you. sometimes they try to talk to you, the Palestinians did so, and we did so, and maybe we have the same claim. But of course, this is not a symmetry conflict. You cannot blame the colonized for their responses on the colonizer. And what I say all the time, that when you push people to the bottom, you don't expect reasonable replies. I'm not saying that we, the Palestinians, are pure innocent, but the main issue of what's going on the ground, or the real title of what's going on the ground, is there's that in Palestine, we have a colonial racist regime. There is an oppressive system of the Zionist colonial movement, against the other people on this land. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hisham. Recently, we have heard that Israeli government classified 6 humanitarian organization in the West Bank and in the Palestine as a terrorist organization. How do you see the correlation, the connection between the illegal organization that they are funding the racism and the classification of those humanitarian organizations?
The question is for me, yeah?
Yes.
By chance, I work for one of these organizations. I work for Al-Haq. It's a Palestinian human rights organization. And what we simply do is that we collect evidence of human rights violations, regardless of the perpetrators. So we collect evidence about human rights violations by the Palestinian Authority itself, and about the Israeli occupation. And what we try to do on the Palestinian level is that we try to work to improve and develop local legislations to abide with international standards. We watch the Palestinian Authority and how much they are committed to the implementation of the viable laws in Palestine, and as I said, it criticizing the local laws and to try to develop new laws, with higher standards. And we also collect evidence about the human rights violations, war crimes, and the crimes against humanity by the Israeli occupation. Part of our work that we do advocacy on the international level, but also we try to go into the accountability for the perpetrators. Part of that is that we have submitted to the International Criminal Law several files about the crimes by the Israeli occupation, war crimes committed in Gaza, the settlement issues in the West Bank, and so on. And also we try to work on the level of business and human rights. We try to follow different companies and firms, how they invest, if they invest in the occupied territories, and the relation of supporting the occupation. And of course, we ask to put sanctions, and we ask these companies not to invest in the settlements and not to support the occupation. And also, this is also a legal commitment in the Geneva Conventions. It says that the third parties, not the occupier, not the occupied, have commitments not to recognize the occupation as a legal situation, not to support the occupation at any means, and to work on ending the occupation. And when we see different countries in the world, lots of countries in the world, they disagree with the settlement policy, and at the same time, they allow their companies to invest in the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. This is a total contradiction between what they talk and what they do. And this is also a violation to the third party's commitment in the Geneva Conventions. So this is what we do simply. And because we do this, and because current defense minister of Israel, he was the chief of staff in 2014 in a military operation in Gaza, and we have submitted several reports to the International Criminal Court about the crimes committed in Gaza. So this person, before he is investigated by the International Criminal Court, he's trying to label us as terrorists for what we do, defending the rights of our people, defending the self-determination of the Palestinian people, and living in dignity and peace on our land. What I've said about Al-Haq applies on other organizations, but we want to talk about another specific organization, the Agriculture Work Committees. They work in developing land in Area C. They help Palestinian farmers develop their land and planting it and irrigating it and building water systems and so on. And this part of land, the Israeli settlements want to follow to use for future expansion for settlements. So they became, sorry for the word, a pain in the ass for the occupiers. So they also labeled this organization as a terror organization. So if we go specifically and study what does these organizations do, we do legal development and also gender development, like we have one women organization and so on. And as I said, our agenda is based on international human rights law and international humanitarian law. While the occupation agenda is simply racism and colonization, and now they follow us and they chase us. And I want to say, it seems that the strategy, instead of defending themselves, of being labeled as, war criminals, now they try to throw the ball on us. And, then our effort will change from chasing them of what they do, collecting evidence against them, sending it to the international humanitarian bodies and the human rights organizations. Now, like they try to get us busy on defending ourselves and by throwing this charge against us.
Thank you. Thank you, Hisham. Now we will go with Bana. It's a challenging to get many villages to start a campaign in Palestine or endorse a campaign at all. How was it for you guys? How were you able to mobilize the ground and even NGOs to endorse the campaign?
Thank you so much, Hisham, and thank you, Ahmed. Well, first of all, I would like to say again that what Hisham said was the point of this discussion, talking about how it's not simply a question of just racism. It's a question of a mix between racism and settler colonialism. And we have to keep talking about both of these in order to target the structures at best. When it came for us at the Defund Racism campaign, it was very challenging to get villages to say, or to agree, or to even start this campaign. One of the things that we kind of helped us develop this campaign was that we ended up having meetings with village councils. So in those meetings, we'd ask them questions like, what are the concerns that you have on the daily basis? And a lot of them were connected to harassment by and settler violence. And also a lot of the times it was fear from house demolitions, from having orders, detainment, and all of these things that had directly connected to names of settler organizations. So we often heard names like Regavim, we heard names like Atirat Kohanim, Israel Land Fund, El-Ad, and we were thinking like those settler organizations are the pinpoints and the focal points of the violence in those communities. And those communities are saying, those are the settlements and they're expanding. And the reason and the way they're expanding is through the support of settler organizations. So we thought at the end of the day, hey, if we're doing a campaign and we're doing a campaign to help those communities, then it should be challenging the structures and not just raising awareness. So our campaign started as a call from the ground, from the people of these communities, saying like, we are going to no longer stand idle, And we're going to confront these organizations and try to tackle their financial structures. So after having multiple meetings, after doing much research on these organizations, we found horrible things connected to these organizations. They were not simply organizations that were monitoring these communities, Palestinian communities, and threatening the civil administration to go and demolish the homes, like the case of Regavim Settler Organization. They were not simply organizations that had on their website lists of property, and they called it ideological property because, and I'm quoting, because for them, Arabs are illegally squatting on them. So they're asking people to buy this property listed on their website, asking them, hey, this is property that Arabs are squatting on, but if you buy it, it's going to be really cheap and will help you kick out those people from that land. And that's, of course, by lawsuits. So you think these are the organizations, these are just the small things. And then links to prostitution circles. We have links to corruption. And then at the end of the day, you start to look into how they receive money. Where do they receive money from? Where are their fiscal sponsors? And then voila, it's the United States, of course. And in the belly of the beast in New York, the state of New York. So after doing much research on the Defund Racism campaign, we decided to do a campaign that is not just target and raising awareness about what these organizations, settler organizations, are doing, but also to try to target and do something about these organizations, target their financial structures. So the Defund Racism campaign is a campaign to halt the flow of money of organizations, of money sent by organizations in the US, specifically in the state of New York for now, and being sent to settler organizations that are displacing Palestinians, ethnically cleansing Palestinians from their land, and supporting settler violence against Palestinians. So we're thinking again, this campaign started from the ground, from people thinking we need to target these organizations because they're the reason of our suffering. They're a huge reason. And we're tired of people claiming, we're tired of people raising awareness about how, settlements are illegal under international law, but then not having an action item dedicated to tackling that question. If you're saying settlements are illegal, if you're saying settlers are doing horrible things, if you're saying organizations are complicit and are part of the colonization in Palestine, then you need to do something about it. So for us, it was important to attach an action item to it. So our campaign is focused on understanding how these US charities that have 501c3 status is actually using that status to send in tax deducted money to these settler organizations. So we decided to focus on 5 settler organizations. One is Al-Ad, and then Regavim, Hebron Fund, Israel Land Fund, Atzirat Kohanim. Now you'll see all of that stuff in our website. I hope Shahad can link it somewhere in the chat box. Our website is called defundracism.org. So you can go there and then see while I'm speaking as you wish. You can see these organizations, exactly what they do. And then you can also find testimonies. But then you will mostly also find a petition as well. And then on your way, you can, of course, sign it. But of course, mainly what I'm here to talk about today is our strategy. So basically our strategy to targeting and changing and targeting the financial structures is to try to revoke the 501c3 status of these organizations in the US that are sending money. So that means that they are no longer a charity. In this case, if they're no longer charity, they cannot send tax deducted money, which means that we're talking about millions of dollars that are being sent to these organizations, in these settler organizations, that will be completely cut off. And then also hoping as well with our filing of a legal complaint to the Attorney General, Letitia James in New York, the state of New York, that in this case, that the legal complaint will compel Letitia James, and with also the support from the ground and mobilizing on the ground, will compel her to investigate the situation of these organizations, the charitable organizations, and will either revoke these or dissolve these organizations. We're of course hoping for, dissolvement. That would be the best case scenario. And in this case where, when we think about, again, the Defund Racism campaign, we're definitely targeting financial structures. So here we're not necessarily just raising awareness about these organizations. We're trying to cut off the funding of these organizations. So this is our major ask of this campaign. But again, what we're also doing is that we're returning to that, to the discourse again. There's been this discourse about, and of course this research by Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, that saying that Israeli practices amount to apartheid practices. So yes, for us, we welcome that kind of situation and that kind of designation. But for us, that's only part of the problem. For us, it was more important to go back and talk about settler colonialism, because apartheid is only a symptom of settler colonialism, and it's necessarily about the land. Sorry, Ahmed.
1 minute left.
Yes. So in general, and I would just like to finish with that. It says that our campaign is not simply a campaign about also changing the structure, the financial structures that are funding colonialism, settler colonialism in Palestine. We're also doing the same in support and good faith with our community organizers in the US that are fighting white supremacy and settler colonialism and racism in the US. So for us, when we think about changing the structures, creating a legal precedent, we're talking about changing the structures also in the US. We're talking about also solidarity, grassroots initiative, call from the ground of both people. So it is necessary to mention for me that this is an intersectional campaign. This is a cross-movement campaign. We're not just talking about Palestinian rights. We're also talking about the rights of people, Indians, and then we're also talking about, we're also talking about indigenous people in all over the world, and strictly we're talking about the Black community. Also, we're talking about people doing anti-racist praxis. All of these communities are all our allies, and we're all working here to defund racism. Thank you, Ahmed, and everybody as well.
Thank you, Bana. I have a question. You said you are targeting the illegal organization that they are registered in the USA as a charitable organization. Why, as Defund Racism campaign, you took this strategy? Why?
Yes, this is a great question. We've had this multiple times asked to us, that why did you guys choose this kind of strategy? When we think about organizing in Palestine, and we're thinking about calls from the ground, we think about this organizing that comes from below. And when we're saying that, we're saying that we are thinking of targeting the structures from below that are enabling this kind of manipulation that allows charities to have this status and keep that status. For us, of course, we've had multiple people come up to us and say, In the US, the 501c3 status is given by the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. So in this case, why don't you target and then file a complaint against them? This has been done before, and it was a complete failure because the IRS is simply, and I would say clearly, is like a black hole. You throw your complaint in, you don't receive anything back. So again, if you think about it, we thought of these ways. We thought like, why don't we go national in this case? But, you know, for doing like, you know, a congressional situation, then it's kind of, again, it misses out that grassroots initiative, and it misses out our genuine stance on, you know, supporting the people in the US, and specifically the natives fighting settler colonialism in the US. We do not, and I would say clearly, we do not stand and recognize the US. We recognize it as a settler colonial state as well. So I think when it comes to that, also our strategy is targeting the structures in the US, yes, but we're also, what we're doing actually specifically with our targeting of Letitia James is that Letitia James has constituents that are fairly pro-Palestinian. They have good Palestinian politics. They're not progressive except for Palestine. So that's very good. So for these people to be mobilized, I think it would be easier for us to say that we can leverage the situation to get Letitia James to create a legal precedent in our favor. And in this case, changing the state laws. In this case, these organizations cannot run away and claim that, you know, this does not apply to them because these are state laws in the US, so they have no other choice but to comply. So in this case, if their 501c3 status gets revoked, it's a win for us. If they get dissolved, it's also a win for us. So that's our strategy.
Yeah, that's bring me to the question that, like, does the Defund Racism campaign have a specific action they ask international and individuals to take in order to support this campaign?
Yes, of course, this is for us, you know, we like to attach action items to our calls. So I would say, I'm sure a lot of you have already clicked on the link to Defund Racism to our website. You will find a petition there. For us, signing the petition is very important. While many Palestinian organizers here on the ground, they don't believe in petitions because it doesn't work in Palestine, but it definitely does have effect in the US when it comes to organizing. So we believe that if you sign the petition, that will also ignite also the mobilization, that will also help the mobilization around Letitia James. So we can pressure and put more support to this mobilization to create the legal precedent. So we asked you to sign the petition. We asked you to share the petition. We have a social media toolkit also on the website that has infographics. It has also posts that you can post. You can also post with the hashtag Defund Racism. And then you can also, if you're part of an organization and you would like to host a webinar with us to explain the campaign to your network, we would also love to do that. If you also feel that you can support this campaign and your organization can take a lead on this campaign as well in the US, even in your state that's not even the state of New York, we also welcome that. So there are many things that we hope you would do, but mostly, and for now, sign the petition, share the petition, share the social media and the hashtag Defund Racism.
Thank you, Bana. And now we are going to Q&A question. And now we have a question for Hisham Sharpati. Hisham, you spent many years on the ground as a field worker. What do you think, what do you see the difference between the past and now, the present, on the field, on the ground? What's the differences? And is that positive or negative?
Actually, the situation is turning from bad to worse. As I said earlier, we have two cities within the West Bank when we have Israeli colonial settlers living in the heart of the city. And one of them is Hebron. You know, when you talk about the Hebron settlers, actually, you talk about unique group of people. They belong to the far right in Israel. Itamar Ben-Gvir is now a member of the Israeli parliament. And Itamar Ben-Gvir, simply he belonged to Kach. Kach was a political movement or an extreme movement that was outlawed by the Israeli law in the year 1994. After one of its members came into the mosque, sprayed with bullets, Muslim worshippers kneeling to pray, and killed 29 of them, wounded 125 others. So this person came from this background. He used to be the lawyer defending the Hilltop youth and the price tag groups. You know, he went out from the field, from the ground to the parliament in Israel. And Itamar Ben-Gvir is not an exception, you know, for the people living in Hebron, for the colonial settlers living in Hebron. In Hebron, we have also, for example, Baruch Marzel. And Marzel belongs to the same movement. I've seen Marzel in a British documentary called Inside God's Bunker, where he have a sticker in his house that says, I've already killed an Arab, and you. So this is the mentality of the settlers living in Hebron. As most of the people on this session are from the US, I give this example, like you imagine getting, for example, 400 from the Caucasus clan people with guns and placing them in harm and giving them guns and police protection on the, you know, on the principle saying that everyone has the right to live wherever he or she wants. I think if this happens in the US, everybody will say that this is totally crazy, that this is insane. Nobody will approve it in the United States. They will consider it as pure intimidation. Although in principle, every American has the right to live in any place in the United States. Here, maybe the difference in mentality in Hebron between the Palestinians and the settlers is nearly the same, or is relatively the same. And we have these settlers, actually, they are the white supremacists, you know, they are giving them guns themselves. They have the protection of the Israeli police, they have the protection of the Israeli army, and they live in Hebron and they do what they do. 95% or 99% of the violations that they do happens on the side of the Israeli police and the Israeli army, and nobody stops them. And although there is a substantial difference that in Hebron, whether these settlers are extreme or moderate, they have no right to be here based on the international law. Anyway, you know, many years ago in the 90s, we had 5 colonial settler enclaves in Hebron. Today, maybe we have 10. You know, we have projects of building. There was a question that I've seen about building in Shuhada Street. And the building in Shuhada Street is also a good example of how the Israeli authorities and the settlers, they do role play. You know, the settlers or the Israeli government has approved building 31 housing apartments in Shuhada Street. They assigned a budget of 22 million shekels, $6.7 million US, to build these housing units in what used to be our central bus station in the many years ago, and it was confiscated and given to the military. Now, the Palestinian municipality of Hebron has appealed to the Israeli court, asking to stop it. And an Israeli court has asked to freeze the project, not completely, stopping it, saying that, the court asked to freeze the project till it gives its final decision. What happened is that nearly a year ago, or less than a year ago, in the heat of the Israeli elections, the army starts work there, and when they were asked, or they were told that the court has asked to freeze the work, they said that this is building infrastructure for the military base and that it's not related to the settlers project.
1 minute left.
And then, and then they start building. And when we ask about it, they say that it's structures for the military use. It's good to know that in the heat also of the American elections and after Biden have been elected, the Israeli government has asked the court to issue the building permit for the settlers building, saying that issuing the building permit does not contradict with the court order that asked for freezing the work. Now they are working there, as I said. The claim is that they are working for the military, but how come the government approved a budget for the settlers and the government at the same time developing structures or building structures for the military? This is just fooling, the international public opinion, trying to fool the Palestinians and so on. And we have other buildings in Hebron, settler enclaves, that are disputed in the Israeli legal system in courts, and the settlers are building there, and the Israeli government and the Israeli authorities are closing their eyes.
Thank you, Hisham. We have a question for Bana from Kathleen. She's saying, Letitia James has recently announced her intention to run for governor of New York State. What opportunities do you think that presents for the Defund Racism campaign?
Excuse me. Yeah. So I would say we've heard about this intention, and we thought about it in relation to our campaign, in relation to our strategy. So I think I mentioned that I previously said in this meeting that scrutiny without consequences is useless, and that applies to Letitia James as well. For us, we cannot say like, hey, Letitia James, this is what these settler organizations, these charities are doing. And this is what these organizations that these charities are funding are doing. And then that's it. Because obviously that will not be, that will not move her to act. But in this case, when we have the support of the power and the people that are supporting her and getting her elected, and of course her constituents, then we can have the leverage to say, hey, you're running for governor, you need the support, so you need to withhold, or you need to enforce the rule of law and state laws and investigate the work of these charities. And once found that these charities send in money, and that's obviously, we have so much evidence to provide for that. It's not even like that hard to provide that, evidence of their violence and racism. And once those things are found, then, it would obviously be a win for us. So for us, her running for governor is another, aspect for us to even push further her constituents to support the campaign and to push her to do something about these charities that have the 501c3 status, and they send in tax deducted money without any questions.
Okay, we have another question for Bana. Bana, what is the next step after getting the signatures?
For us, I think after we get the signatures on the petition, one of the aspects of this campaign, again, as we said, is filing the legal complaint. So for us to file the legal complaint, we need, of course, not just the support of the petitions, but we need support and mobilization in the ground in the state of New York, in other states, her constituents, and also all these networks around Letitia James that could eventually, help us with, this legal complaint to have this kind of heaviness to it and effect. So for us, the next stage would be filing the legal complaint, providing facts and evidence for the horrible stuff that these organizations commit to the Palestinian communities here, and also to expand on settlements as well, and support settler violence. And of course, after that, we're hoping that this support and mobilization in efforts of raising awareness will help move Letitia James to decide and to investigate, hopefully also not just revoke, but also dissolve these organizations.
So back to the question, there is a question. They want to make sure if the Letitia James acknowledge or comment on the Defund Racism campaign. Have she heard or she talked about it before or acknowledged that?
What was it? Who was it? Sorry.
Has Letitia James acknowledged or commented on the Defund Racism campaign yet?
Yeah, we've had that question before. Yes. So we are, of course, we know that after multiple events, including one protest in front of her headquarters, and also a lot of different articles coming out about Defund Racism campaign, we're sure that her office has knowledge of our campaign, but we have not yet received any statement. And so far, we're not asking for statements. Actually, we're asking for accountability. So for us, it's not even going to be helpful to have a statement, unless the statement is about her opening an investigation without that legal complaint, which would be almost impossible at this stage because of movability, and also maybe because it's dangerous to go after Zionist organizations. It's much different than going even against organizations that support white supremacy. I think there's that length to it as well. So, I mean, if that's not the statement, I don't think any statement will come out of their office. But we know and we're sure that the office has knowledge of our campaign and our asks.
Thank you. Hisham, we have another question for you. Do the Geneva Convention third-party commitments also apply to a private colonial funders, from example, the US? Do US citizens have standing in the ICC?
Of course, when we talk about third parties, when we talk about third parties, we talk about the states. The Geneva Conventions mainly talk about state responsibility, but there are other laws and regulations about violations of the human rights and crimes against humanity. For example, the ICC Charter, it talks about individual responsibility. It does not talk about state's responsibility, but of course there are other regulations maybe about it. But individuals, by the international law, let's say in general, whether international human rights law or international humanitarian law, should not get engaged in any type of the human rights violation, should not be engaged in any kind of business or investment that supports human rights, that support a violation for the human right. So there is an individual responsibility. But when you talk about the ICC, the United States itself, for example, does not sign or didn't sign the ICC charter or mandate. So the US is not part of the International Criminal Court. But if any American person is engaged in a war crime or a crime against the humanity in a country that has already signed, then he or she will face legal consequences based on that, whether he is an American or another citizen. Because the ICC or relating the ICC, there is part of the work has geographic, let's say, geographic standards on which the perpetrator should be a national of a country that has signed, or he perpetrated his crime in a country that is a signer of the ICC charter.
Thank you, Hisham.
I want to respond actually about a question somebody talked about. Israel talking about fighting Hamas, and the cracking down.
We have less
terrorism.
than 2 minutes.
And actually this is a fake question, and this is trying to run away from the real cause. As I said, we have a colonial regime in Palestine. We have the occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, since 1967. Hamas was founded in the late 80s. Now Israel, as I said earlier, if you talk to the Israelis about it, they will say the Palestinians did so, and then they try to mislead you. As I said earlier, we are not a pure innocent, but the main issue is the colonization and the occupation here. So if we go back, to the early, let's say 60s, to the 60s and the 70s, the Israelis tried to connect the Palestinian fight for independence and liberation. They tried to connect it to the Cold War, saying that the PLO is part of the East Europe Soviet bloc and so on, that is against the individual freedoms and the free world and so on. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they should invent a new enemy, and then the new enemy became, the extreme Islam. This is, I don't want to go in lots of details about it, but even like, inventing the the Islamic enemy created. It was the United States of America that has recruited Osama bin Laden to find the Soviets in Afghanistan. The phrase jihad was absence for hundreds of years or tens of years, till the Americans have revived it by supporting the extreme Islamic movements, allowing extremists to go to Afghanistan to fight what they called communism there, and then they started the fire and they could not stop it.
Thank you, Hisham. Before we ending, we have important question. Signatures from outside the US can support or help the campaign?
I would not necessarily say so, but it's not like we don't welcome signatures from outside of New York specifically, because for us, our organizing is based in New York, and then also we're trying to get the people also in the US and in mainly like in New York to sign the petition. But of course, in Canada and outside, we as, of course, like the Good Shepherd Collective has mentioned in the chat, that we're thinking of ways to expand the campaign outside of the state of New York and also outside of the US as well. So in those cases, you can still sign the petition. You can also still share the petition. There's no reason to not do so.
Thank you, Bana, and thank you, Hisham, for being here, Julie and Shahad, and all the CBT members, Good Shepherd Collective and Hebron Defense Committee. Thank you for joining us. If you have any question left didn't answered, you can email us. We have already sent our email. We can answer you. We hope that you can support us and sign the petition and be the line with against racism. Thank you all of you, and goodbye.